Hello and welcome back to Seagulls Central. My name is Adam MacDonald. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thank you very much for clicking on this video. If you are a first-time viewer, thank you for coming to this channel. And if you've been here before and you are part of this brilliant community that we're building here on the fastest growing Brighton fan community out there on social media, thank you very much for returning to the channel. And we've had some big news at the top of Brighton Hove Albion, the top of the football club. We've seen some changes this morning. It's Friday morning, the day before the Bournemouth game, and at around 10 a.m, Brighton Hove Albion released a statement regarding the future, regarding the situation of technical director David Weir. Now, David Weir has been at the club for a while now. He was the loans manager. He was brought in as a loans manager probably in, 2020. It was under the Dan Ashworth era. And after Dan Ashworth obviously left to go to Newcastle at the time, in May 2022, that was, David Weir stepped up. He was acting interim technical director for a little bit, and then he became the technical director proper after having only really been at the club for like a year or so at that point, and has spent, the best part of what's it been, kind of three and a bit years as the proper technical director for the club, and overseen some brilliant times. You think about some of the signings we've brought in that time. You think about some of the success we've had on the field. You think of the managerial appointments that we've made in that time as well. He would have been part of the side that helped to bring in, Roberto De Zerbi after the Graham Potter departure. He would have been part of the team that helped appoint Fabian Hurzeler. He would have been part of the team that brought players in like Jorginho Rutter, who've been so successful. Yankuba Minteh getting those deals done. Carlos Baleba bringing them to the club. Supporting Paul Barber with the operation when it comes to selling players as well and getting the very best price for them. Overseeing the loan structure, making sure all the players are on the kind of best pathway for their development. Obviously overseeing the women's team as well. He has jurisdiction over that to an extent as well, and the academy. And let's be real, since May 2022, it has been a continuation of the success that someone like Dan Ashworth we really saw palpably. That was the kind of start when he came in of kind of a real change in direction and a real progression for the football club. And David Weir, brilliantly, in my opinion, has continued that legacy, did a brilliant job in that time. Obviously, I've listed some of the achievements, some of the things that we did during that time. Obviously, the appointment of De Zerbi, the brilliant football that was played under them, the signings, the loans we were able to do in terms of giving players more experience, ultimately getting European football, being able to play in Europe with him as technical director, a very, very impressive kind of feat, and also kind of supporting the academy who've done really, really well in recent months. All the men's teams doing brilliantly, the women's teams and the growth of that. So I think you've got to give credit to this. What is a bit weird though, and what is a bit interesting, is the statement that has been released regarding his exit this morning, and I will read it out. The headline is Club Statement, David Weir. So I think, often when someone leaves, it's kind of like David Weir leaves the club. Anyway, let's not read into that too much. It's a statement. It's a pretty brief statement. It's 5 paragraphs or so, probably only a couple of hundred words, and it reads like this. Brighton Hove Albion have confirmed that David Weir has left the club. David joined as a pathway development manager, which is obviously loans manager, in 2018. After a short spell as assistant technical director, he became the club's technical director in May 22 after Dan Ashworth's departure. Chairman Tony Bloom has said this, and these are the quotes. David has served our club very well, but we now wish to refresh our technical area with new leadership and new direction. I'd like to thank David for everything he's done for us, and I wish him well for the future. Paul Barber's also chimed in, Chief Executive and Deputy Chairman in his own right. I've greatly enjoyed working with David over the past 8 years, and have appreciated his support and hard work throughout this period. I wish David all the best going forward. And then the final line is this: Paul Barber will continue to oversee all technical areas of the club, working with the existing senior team until David's successor is confirmed. So, how do we read into this statement? Has David Weir left of his own volition? Has the club decided to move in a different direction? I think the key line there is the whole, David, this is obviously from Tony Bloom, David served our club very well, but it's time to refresh our technical area with new leadership and new direction. It might well transpire that David Weir's going up to take a technical director, maybe chief exec role, maybe with Everton, with the kind of way that club is kind of refreshing things, obviously under David Moyes and the new ownership. However, with that said, I do think that the tone of that sentence, we wish to refresh our technical area with new leadership, new direction, maybe suggests that this has been a club-led decision, and maybe they've decided to make a move in, freshening things up. At least, literally reading that from the statement, we want to refresh things. We want to find some new leadership, a new direction, and I think maybe this is a natural decision. Maybe after a few years at a club, maybe it is one of those things where you think you want to refresh your technical staff a little bit. I think maybe this fact that in terms of timing, it's come literally, not immediately in terms of days, but pretty much immediately after the transfer window. We haven't even played a game since the transfer window shut. It's been the international break. Maybe they've been time to take stock. And now that the transfer window's over and David Weir's kind of time where it's really crunch time for him in terms of getting transfers in and out, maybe now that period's moved on, they decided to make a decision on this. I don't know. I think it is interesting. I think maybe, we got to reflect a little bit, particularly on last season and the way that many of us kind of spoke about the squad and the squad building and the way that the squad had been built over the last kind of couple of seasons, let's say year, 18 months or so. It felt particularly, and whilst we had many injuries, we did suffer with injuries, Brighton, last season. However, it did feel often like the squad that was built last year, particularly, was a squad where there were quite a lot of square pegs in round holes. We kind of stockpiled in certain positions, and maybe we were just buying for what the market kind of presented to us in terms of great opportunities to buy. And we actually didn't necessarily kind of buy the best players for the squad that we were trying to build. Perfect example of this is obviously last season with injuries in our defence. It meant that we were kind of lacking. We were left with Lewis Dunk, Jan-Paul van Hecke, Webster, who was in and out with injury, Dunk, who was in and out of injury, and Igor Julia as well, who was in and out of injury, and ultimately wasn't a Fabian Hurzeler kind of perfect signing. We didn't have brilliant cover at left back. You think Estupiñán didn't have huge depth. Obviously, we lost Barco. Ferdi Kadioglu wasn't really available to play at right back. I think all of these positions we've been able to strengthen. You think the midfield as well was one where it wasn't perfectly ready last season. We'd obviously lost Billy Gilmore, Pascal Gross, Alexis McAllister, Moises Caicedo. Maybe the succession planning there wasn't brilliant, and it felt like we'd continue to bring in some brilliant players, bring in players who absolutely, in terms of this club's model, will be able to turn their value into profit, and we'll be able to kind of continue selling them and buying for cheap, selling for more. It's absolutely adhered to that. I think maybe in terms of the right here and right now and building players for the future, building a squad with players for the now, I think maybe that could be a criticism you could level. I think certainly last season many of us were saying, it's not necessarily on Hurzeler's head, this kind of wobble that we're having and the unsure vibe that many of us were getting. It was maybe around the players and the lack of kind of flexibility that we had in a lot of those players, and quite the limited nature in the way that he had to play. He couldn't necessarily play to his system perfectly. And I think that's what the club have tried to amend and fix this summer that we've just had, trying to buy players who suit his system a little bit more and help him play in the perfect kind of Hurzeler system. They've really supported him with signings in that sense. I think also maybe some of the loans recently, you think about the way that the Enciso deal's been handled, the Buonanotte deal, for example, as well. I think that's one that's baffled a lot of people. Maybe that's a deal that, maybe has raised some eyebrows. It's personally raised some eyebrows with us. So I think there are reasons to wonder why this decision might have been made, whether it was in his hands or in the club's hands. But I think there is some criticism that we could level at David Weir in terms of the decision-making in the last kind of, let's say, 18 months. However, I will say this, I will caveat with this. We don't know. We absolutely do not know. He absolutely could have left, with his own, on his own terms. It also, it's not something where we're massively privy to what's going on inside the club. And these are just our views from the outside in terms of what we've seen, the structure, the players that have been brought in, and the way that, the club's been moving in the last few years. And in terms of that interim period, I think it's important to note the way that Brighton, succession plan and they think about the future and these contingencies that the club kind of operate within. We've got to talk about the assistant technical director. Obviously, David Weir was the assistant technical director under Dan Ashworth, obviously stepped up when Dan Ashworth left the club. Brighton brought in Mike Kay from Fulham. He was the Fulham Academy director. He'd been at Fulham for probably the best part of kind of 8, 9, 10 years. He'd come in as a kind of player performance analyst. He'd come in as a as an academy kind of manager, then academy director, and he came over to Brighton as the assistant technical director. Prior to this, he worked for IMG in sales positions. It was only in 2014 when he actually moved into football formally. So he's got good executive experience and obviously good footballing experience as well. You'd imagine that the club are going to make a decision, at least for the interim period. They say Paul Barber will continue to oversee all technical areas of the club. I'd imagine Mike Cave's remit, at least in the interim period, maybe as acting technical director, will step up and they'll see whether they make that appointment. It wouldn't surprise me at all. In fact, I would expect it, that Mike Cave will be promoted into that technical director role. It seems like that's the succession planning that Brighton always seem to opt for. You saw it with Paul Winstanley when he left, and Sam Jewell stepped up into his position in the recruitment part of the club. We've seen it with David Weir and Dan Ashworth. We've seen it across the board in the way that, players, in terms of how staff kind of step up when other staff leave. So that would be my prediction, but the club's absolutely in brilliant hands for the interim. Let me know what you think. Do you think this is a strange decision? Do you think this is one that's caught you by surprise? Do you think actually, when you think about it, maybe it's one that kind of makes sense? Do you think, David Weir, we're going to see him crop up in a few weeks' time, maybe in Everton or another club as their technical director? Let me know. I'd love to know your thoughts. And how would you evaluate David Weir's time at the club at Brighton Hove Albion since he formally became technical director in 2022? Let me know your thoughts below. As always, if you got this far in the video and you've enjoyed it, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, turn your notifications on, get in the comments, let me know what you thought. And I will see you after the Bournemouth game, for a big game, by the way, a massive, massive game. And I'm really, really excited to review that after Saturday, 3 p.m. I'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much for watching. And as always, up the Albion.